Excluding provisionals, the latest official figures for the 10-year time frame, 1975-1984, average out at 1.796. Excluding provisionals, the TFR is 1.818 for the 5-year time frame. For a 5-year time frame, excluding provisionals, the TFR is 1.813. The 1986 birth rates are running about 3% lower than 1985 rates and 1 to 2% lower than census projections published in 1984. From everything known as the gallery From everything known as the gallery proofs of this volume go to the printer in early March 1987. The U.S. projections of 1.815 provided by the UN/World Bank are either just about right on the money or slightly high, depending on how many years one chooses to average. When the U.S. Census Bureau drops its middle series TFR projections to a flat 1.8, when they will almost surely do the next time projections are published. Probably in 1988, all the 1.815 projections in this book will be somewhat higher than the official census projections. Caution, provisionals and estimates are just that. They can change slightly up or down when made official, but the range is fairly tight. The key point is this: U.S. fertility is low and for now staying low. So, a new modern Western world with less growth, the U.S. with less growth, and in not so distant future, the likelihood of fewer people. First, in the West generally, and then probably the U.S. too, this should provide plenty of food for thought for business looking ahead. For young people who one day will be not so young in businesses that face shrinking markets, for middle-aged people who will soon be older and wondering where all their federal security pension money will come from, for people who may one day sell a house and not find a buyer at a reasonable price. In short, it is food for thought for almost everyone. What does the birth dearth yield from an economic perspective? Essentially, two intertwined problems: shrinking domestic market and an older population. Now this is where he gets to age blaming. These in turn yield still other problems. Put together, all these problems don't typically occur at a precise moment. That is, at the instant population growth ceases, or at the instant population starts shrinking. The harmful economic effects of the birth dearth do not constitute an event. Rather, they make up a process, almost ready to begin. Low growth, no growth, shrinkage. First on the agenda is, what if domestic markets shrink? It is really so terrible? Some economics say probably not. It's true, you produce fewer widgets because there are fewer people to buy them. However, the optimistic economists say there are also eventual fewer people needed to produce them. So while total sales or total profits may decline, sales and profits per worker may not decline at all. And that's what counts: productivity. In fact, these economists say productivity may even go up. The economists continue: a birth dearth yields fewer young markets. There is then more bidding for their services. Youth unemployment goes down, wages go up, more capital is invested to buy equipment to replace the higher cost of labor. The newer equipment yields higher productivity per worker. We all get wealthier and everyone lives happily ever after. That is a nice scenario. There is likely some truth to it. There are also gaping holes in the argument. Who will buy those goods so efficiently produced? As mentioned, a birth dearth does not only provide fewer workers, it provides fewer buyers. And a birth dearth also sets up a sharp changing up age distribution of the population, and sets that change distribution in oddly staggering patterns. Some of these age patterns, along with some of the stark and discombobulating effects uh, will be coming at us in a very near future. Housing is a classic case in point. The housing industry, now housing, new housing that is, by itself provides about 3% of the jobs in America. But what about the jobs for people who make the original equipment that goes into the new houses? What sort of things? What Start with the finances. Start with uh, furnaces, air conditioner stoves, refrigerators, electronic garage doors, intercom systems, and carpets. And what about the stimulus with new housing provides for the home furnishing industry? What sort of things? The extra lamps, sofas, beds, desks, television sets, VCRs, video rooms, bedspreads, clocks, new phones with automated dialing features, and so on and so forth. And what about the real estate brokers, the mortgage bankers, and the termite inspectors? Put it all together, and it involves about 11 million jobs, or about 10% of the American workforce. Now consider this. People typically buy their first house when they are young. That makes sense. That's what they typically marry and typically have children, even if they only have one. In 1990, according to census data, the number of young Americans aged 25 to 35 will be 44 million. By the year 2000, because of the onset of the birth dearth in early 1970s, the number of the young people aged 25 to 35 will be only 35 million. That is a 1 decade decline of young adults of 18%, while the United States is still growing. Should one assume that new housing in the next decade will be decline about should one assume the new housing in the next market will be in decline about that much? In theory, roughly so. That's bad for the housing industry and people who work in the housing industry. But it can affect other people as well. Today's yuppies, for example. In the 1990s, they likely will be well-to-do middle-aged people. As such, they will likely want to buy bigger, better, upscale houses. They could buy an existing house or quite possibly a new house. In theory, that should help the housing industry. Fine, but who will buy all the old houses? 18% fewer people in the prior decade, that's who. uh, will that upscale middle-aged yuppie really be able to buy that expensive house if they don't get a decent price for their old one? What will they get a good price? Somewhere in the housing process, roughly 18% fewer houses will be sold due to fewer buyers from the birth dearth cohorts. That makes it a buyer's market. The yuppie generation hurts. The yuppie generation gets hurt. The birth dearth generation is helped. But the housing industry, seen nationally, but not by specific location, will be hurt, possibly severely. In the decade to come, even though it is doing well right now, most people will find it difficult to buy more expensive new houses if they don't get a decent price for their existing dwelling. And there is something else at work. Remember, in a birth dearth society, the population eventually gets not only smaller in number, but older. And as a society gets older, sooner or later lots of people die, even with increased life expectancy. Many of those dead people leave empty houses, and as the number of people dying grows and grows, the number of people dying and leaving empty houses soon starts closing in on, and then ultimately exceeds the number of people coming into the housing market. The number of people coming into the housing market will exceed people dying. Okay. That process leaves even more empty houses on the market than in normal times. It may mean that in some given decade of the future, the theoretical new housing market declines by 18%, not by 18%, but by 40 or 60% or more, in theory, a 100% decline, there will theoretically be enough empty old houses to take care of the demand for new housing. In fact, at about the year 2000, the number of deaths will exceed the number of new entrances into the housing market in Western Europe. In America, that crossover point isn't approaching until a couple of 3 decades later. Depending on whether one uses census data or UN Middle Series projections, and quicker yet if fertility should fall somewhat further. But in any event, the spread between housing entrance and deaths diminished steadily as the years go on. The lowering new housing demand even below the 18% figure cited for 1990, the number of deaths projected for a single year 2000 is about 300,000 more than for 1985. If it takes two elderly dead people to free up one house, that raises the year 2000 existing housing supply by about 150,000 per year, compared to the 1985 market, further depressing demand for new housing. All this is in theory. Economist and housing expert John Weicher of the American Enterprise Institute put some caveats to the theory. If housing prices fall due to less demand, he says, there will be more abandonment and razing of low-income dwellings, not the straight one-for-one trade-off described above, where 18% fewer housing entrants yield 18% housing. On the other hand, says Weicher, this razing/abandonment process can lead to deserted, donut-like central cities. The process of democratic diminishment, says Weicher, does not fall evenly on all concerned. People working in construction and in those fields that provide raw material for housing get hurt the most. Masons, lumberjacks, brickmakers, and so on. People working in the furniture and appliance fields are harmed less. Those items tend to wear out over time and need replacement over time, even if the new housing construction is low. In the, quote, trading up scenario outlined earlier, builders and slum landlords get hurt more severely than middle-income landowners, says Welcher. Moreover, Weicher notes, as the demographics go on, some builders will concentrate on building dwellings other than suburban homes, vacation houses, for example. Still, Weicher says, after all the caveats are applied, the housing industry and the people who work in it is going to get hurt, at least moderately. Housing expert George Steinlieb, director of the Center for Urban Policy Research at Rutgers University, put it starkly. You simply are not going to have that demand for starter houses that dominated our housing thinking for the past 40 years. Let us leave Weicher and Steinlieb now and return to that lucky new entrant to the labor force in 1990. Is he really so lucky? He is. It's true, in a tight labor market, but will his services be bid for in a housing industry when demand for dwellings fall? Why? Has anyone ever heard of a tight labor market with a dearth of jobs? I confess I have not figured out this industry by industry. There have been some labor force and consumption models produced at the basis of low fertility in the future, but apparently nothing from the point of view of industries and businesses themselves. The commercial demographic business is growing rapidly these days, billing an estimated 40 million per year. Unfortunately, they concentrate mostly on micro-mini projects, like how to protect a direct mail list by using census tract and zip code data, how to perfect a direct mail list. Sorry. I suspect they could render a greater service for their clients if they looked out to the immediate term and speculated on the sweeping change in demographic composition that is coming our way. Oof.